The summer heat pressed down on Riverdale like a heavy blanket. Officer Frank Miller wiped sweat from his forehead as he cruised through the Oak Hills neighborhood in his patrol car. The air conditioning struggled against the 90-degree temperature. Frank had been on the police force for 15 years, and he had his own ideas about how to keep this town safe. These ideas did not make him popular with everyone, but he didn't care. He believed some people needed to be watched more carefully than others. Oak Hills was the richest area in town. Big houses with perfect green lawns lined the streets. Most of the people who lived here were white doctors, lawyers, and business owners. Frank liked patrolling here. It was quiet and the people respected the police. They waved when he drove by. They brought him cold drinks sometimes when he was on duty. Frank turned onto Maple Street just as the sun began to set. Orange light filled the sky. He noticed a black SUV with tinted windows moving slowly down the street. The car had out-of-state license plates. The driver seemed to be looking at house numbers, slowing down and sometimes stopping before moving on. Frank's eyes narrowed. He didn't like the look of this. He especially didn't like it when he saw who was driving. The man behind the wheel was black, maybe in his 50s, wearing what looked like an expensive suit. Frank didn't need to think twice. He flipped on his police lights and pulled in behind the SUV. He didn't bother calling it into the station. He'd handle this himself. The SUV pulled over right away, which Frank took as a sign of guilt. People who had nothing to hide usually ask questions first. He parked his patrol car, adjusted his gun belt, and stepped out. The evening was quiet, except for the chirping of birds and the distant sound of a lawnmower. A few neighbors peeked out from behind curtains to see what was happening. Inside the SUV, General Howard Richardson took a deep breath. He had just flown in from Washington, D.C. after a long week of meetings at the Pentagon. 30 years in the United States Army had taught him patience and calm in difficult situations. As the head of strategic operations for the entire armed forces, he had faced much worse than being pulled over by a local cop. But something felt off about this stop. Howard was in town for his nephew's graduation from Riverdale University. His younger brother Paul had moved here 3 months ago to work as a doctor at the local hospital. Howard had never visited before and was having trouble finding the new house in this maze of similar-looking streets. He had been checking his phone's map and looking at house numbers when the police lights flashed behind him. Frank approached, the driver's side window with his right hand resting on his gun. He stood slightly behind the door frame, a position they taught at the police academy to stay safe during traffic stops. His face was hard, suspicious. Howard rolled down his window and smiled politely. "Good evening, officer." Frank did not return the smile. "License and registration," he said coldly. He didn't explain why he had pulled the SUV over. Howard kept his hands visible on the steering wheel. "May I ask why I've been pulled over, officer? I don't believe I was speeding." Frank's hand moved from resting on his holster to actually gripping his gun. "I said license and registration. Do it now." Howard noticed the change in the officer's posture and recognized danger when he saw it. His military training kicked in. "Stay calm. Don't make sudden movements. Comply with orders, but protect yourself." "Officer, I'm going to reach for my wallet." Very slowly. "It's in my inside jacket pocket." Howard moved his right hand with deliberate slowness toward his suit jacket. Frank pulled his gun completely out of its holster and pointed it directly at Howard. "Keep your hands where I can see them. Don't move." Howard froze. The situation was escalating for no reason. Through the open window, he could feel the evening breeze on his face. He could hear children playing somewhere down the street. And now he was looking down the barrel of a gun held by an officer who seemed determined to find a threat where none existed. "Sir, I'm not armed," Howard said evenly. "I'm just trying to follow your instructions to provide my license. Get out of the vehicle. Now." Frank's voice was louder now. His finger hovered near the trigger of his gun. Across the street, Susan Palmer was watering her flowers when she noticed the police lights. Susan served on the city council and had lived in Oak Hills for 20 years. She watched with growing concern as the officer drew his weapon on what appeared to be an unarmed man. She put down her watering can, pulled out her phone, and began recording. Howard carefully opened the car door with his left hand, keeping his right hand visible. I'm getting out slowly, officer. Frank stepped back, gun still aimed at Howard's chest. Face the vehicle, hands on the hood. Howard did as he was told. The metal of the SUV's hood was still warm from the day's heat. He spread his legs as instructed and placed his hands flat on the hood. His military uniform was hanging in the back seat, pressed and ready for tomorrow's ceremony. His four-star general's insignia was pinned to the shoulders. But right now, in his civilian clothes, he was just another black man being treated like a criminal for driving in the wrong neighborhood. What are you doing in this area? Frank demanded, keeping his gun trained on Howard. I'm visiting my brother. He lives on this street. I'm trying to find his house, Howard replied calmly. Frank laughed. Sure you are. Nobody who looks like you lives in Oak Hills. The comment hung in the air between them. Howard had heard similar things throughout his life, even as he rose through the ranks of the military, even as he advised presidents and led thousands of troops. My brother is Dr. Paul Richardson. He moved here recently to work at Riverdale Medical Center. He's the new head of neurology, Howard explained. Frank wasn't listening. He was already reaching for his handcuffs with his free hand. We've had reports of break-ins in this area. You match the description. What description would that be, officer? Howard asked, knowing full well what the answer was. Before Frank could respond, another police car pulled up. The light of day was fading fast now, and the red and blue lights from both patrol cars bounced off the houses and trees. Officer Diane Carter stepped out of the second car. She was Frank's supervisor and had been on the force for 20 years. Miller, what's going on here? She called out as she approached. Frank kept his gun pointed at Howard. Just a routine traffic stop, ma'am. Subject was driving suspiciously through the neighborhood. Wouldn't comply with instructions. Diane looked at the well-dressed man standing with his hands on the hood of the expensive SUV. Something didn't add up. She noticed several neighbors had come outside now. Susan Palmer was still recording everything from across the street. Sir, can you tell me your name? Diane asked, her tone professional but not hostile. My name is General Howard Richardson, United States Army. My military ID is in my wallet, which I was reaching for when your officer pulled his weapon on me. Diane's eyes widened slightly. She recognized the name immediately. General Richardson had been in the news just last week after testifying before Congress about military readiness. She had seen him on television standing next to the president. Miller, lower your weapon, she ordered. Frank hesitated, his gun still pointed at Howard's back. That's an order, Officer Miller. Lower your weapon now. The street had grown very quiet. Even the birds seemed to have stopped chirping. The last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the houses, leaving the scene illuminated only by porch lights and the flashing red and blue of the police cars. Frank did not lower his gun right away. He kept it pointed at Howard's back while doubt crept into his mind. Could this man really be a general? It seemed impossible to Frank. He had never met a black general before. He had always pictured generals as old white men with gray hair and medals. Miller! Diane's voice was sharp now. I said lower your weapon. Slowly, Frank put his gun back in its holster. His face was tight with anger and confusion. He did not like being told what to do, especially not in front of someone he had already decided was suspicious. Diane stepped forward. General Richardson, I apologize for this misunderstanding. You are free to turn around, sir. Howard turned around carefully. His face showed no anger, but his eyes were serious and watchful. Years of military training had taught him to stay calm in dangerous situations. This was not the first time he had faced prejudice, even in his high position. Thank you, officer, Howard said to Diane. May I reach for my identification now? Of course, sir, Diane said. Howard slowly reached inside his jacket and pulled out his wallet. He handed Diane his military ID card with its official Department of Defense seal and the 4 stars of his rank clearly visible. Frank stared at the ID in disbelief. Across the street, Susan Palmer was still recording everything on her phone. Other neighbors had gathered on their porches and lawns to watch. Some had their phones out too. In the modern world, moments like this never stayed private for long. Everything appears to be in order, General Richardson, Diane said, handing back the ID. Again, I apologize for this incident. Are you able to find your brother's address? Perhaps we can escort you there. Before Howard could answer, a car pulled up behind the police vehicles. A man jumped out and ran toward them. He looked similar to Howard but was younger by a few years and wore a white doctor's coat. This was Dr. Paul Richardson, Howard's brother. "Howard, what's going on here?" Paul called out as he approached. He had been at the hospital finishing his work when a neighbor called to tell him about the police stopping someone outside his house. "Paul," Howard said with relief, "I was just trying to find your new place." Paul looked at the police officers, his eyes moving from Diane to Frank, then back to his brother. "Are you okay? Why are there police cars with their lights on?" "There was a misunderstanding," Howard said simply. He did not want to upset his brother on what should have been a happy family occasion. Paul was not fooled. He had lived in America his whole life and understood what kind of misunderstanding might happen to his brother in this neighborhood. What kind of misunderstanding involves two police cars? Frank shifted uncomfortably. He did not like how this situation was changing. Just minutes ago, he had been in control. Now he felt like he was the one being questioned. "Sir, it was a routine traffic stop," Frank said to Paul. "Your brother was driving slowly through the neighborhood looking at houses." "So you pulled a gun on him?" Paul asked. He had seen Frank's hand on his holster. Diane stepped in quickly. "Dr. Richardson, I assure you this matter will be fully investigated. Right now, I think it would be best if you and the general went home. We've caused enough disruption to your evening." More cars were arriving on the street now. News traveled fast in small towns like Riverdale. One of the cars belonged to the mayor, Alan Griffith, who lived just 3 houses down. He walked over, quickly, dressed in casual clothes as if he had been relaxing at home. "What's happening here, Officer Carter?" the mayor asked. He knew Diane from many town meetings. Diane looked uncomfortable. "Just a traffic misunderstanding, Mayor. We're resolving it now." The mayor looked at Howard, then at Paul in his doctor's coat, then back at the police officers. His political instincts told him this was not a simple misunderstanding. "General Richardson, is that you?" Howard nodded. The mayor had recognized him from television and newspaper articles. "Yes, Mr. Mayor. I just arrived in town for my nephew's graduation." The mayor stepped forward and shook Howard's hand. "It's an honor to have you in Riverdale, General. I'm sorry if there's been any trouble." Frank stood to the side, watching this scene unfold with growing unease. The man he had just held at gunpoint was now shaking hands with the mayor. The suspicious person turned out to be one of the highest-ranking military officers in the country. Frank knew he had made a serious mistake. Susan Palmer walked across the street to join the group. She had stopped recording but still held her phone. "Mayor Griffith, as a member of the city council, I believe we need to address what just happened. Here, I have the entire incident recorded." The mayor looked concerned. "Let's not jump to conclusions, Susan. I'm sure the police department will conduct a proper review." "With all due respect, Mayor," Susan said, "this is exactly the kind of incident our Community Oversight Committee was created to review." Howard raised his hand slightly. "If I may speak." Everyone fell silent. His voice was calm but carried the authority of someone used to being listened to. "I appreciate everyone's concern, but right now I would just like to spend time with my family. My nephew graduates tomorrow, and that should be our focus." Paul put his hand on his brother's shoulder. "Howard's right. This is a family time. But," he added, looking directly at Frank, "this isn't over." Diane nodded. "Dr. Richardson, will need statements from both you and the general, but that can wait until tomorrow. Officer Miller will be placed on administrative leave pending review, effective immediately." Frank's face flushed red. "What? You can't do that. I was following protocol for suspicious vehicles." "That's enough, Miller," Diane said firmly. "Turn in your badge and gun. We'll discuss this at the station." The neighbors watched as Frank reluctantly removed his badge and handed it along with his gun to Diane. His hands shook with anger and shame. In 15 years on the force, he had never been disciplined like this. He had always believed he was doing his job the right way. The mayor turned to Howard. General, on behalf of our town, I want to personally apologize. This is not how we treat visitors to Riverdale, especially distinguished ones like yourself. Howard nodded but said nothing. He had heard apologies before. What mattered more was what happened next. What actions followed the words. If you'll excuse us, Paul said, I'd like to take my brother home now. The crowd began to disperse. The excitement was over, but the conversations were just beginning. In living rooms and on phones across town, people were already talking about what had happened on Maple Street. By morning, the story would spread far beyond Riverdale. Howard and Paul walked to Paul's car. Behind them, Diane was speaking quietly, but firmly to Frank. The mayor was talking to Susan about her video recording. The red and blue lights from the police cars still flashed in the growing darkness. Are you really okay? Paul asked his brother when they were alone. Howard sighed. I've been better, but I've been worse too. This shouldn't have happened. Paul said, anger in his voice. Not to anyone, and certainly not to you. But it did happen, Howard said. And now we have to decide what to do about it. They got into Paul's car and drove the short distance to his house. Howard looked out the window at the perfect houses and neat lawns. Riverdale looked peaceful in the evening light. But appearances could be deceiving, as he had just experienced firsthand. Tomorrow would bring his nephew's graduation, but it would also bring questions, interviews, and decisions. The incident would not simply go away. Howard knew that as a general, he had power and influence that others in his position might not have. The question was how to use that influence to make sure that what happened to him would not happen to someone else, someone without stars on their shoulders to protect them. Morning came to Riverdale with unusual activity. The local news vans parked outside the police station. Reporters with microphones and cameras waited on the sidewalk. Inside, Chief Gregory Bennett sat at his desk with a deep frown on his face. He had watched Susan Palmer's video recording of the incident 5 times already. Each viewing made him more upset. Chief Bennett had been running the Riverdale Police Department for 12 years. He was proud of his officers and the work they did. But what he saw in that video troubled him deeply. He picked up his phone and made a call he never wanted to make. Mayor Griffith, we need to get ahead of this, he said when the mayor answered. The video is already online. It's getting thousands of views. At Paul Richardson's house, Howard sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee. He wore his full military uniform now, the 4 stars on each shoulder catching the morning light. His medals and ribbons told the story of a lifetime of service. 30 years in the Army had taken him around the world, through war zones and peace talks, to the White House and the Pentagon. Now it had brought him here to a small town where being a general had not protected him from being treated like a criminal. Paul entered the kitchen with his son, Kevin. Kevin was 22 years old and would graduate from Riverdale University today with a business degree. He wore a nice suit and a nervous expression. Uncle Howard, I saw the video, Kevin said. It's all over social media. Everyone at school is talking about it. Howard nodded. He had expected this. I'm sorry if this takes attention away from your big day. Kevin shook his head. Don't apologize. What that cop did was wrong. People need to see it. The doorbell rang. Paul went to answer it and returned with Mayor Griffith and Chief Bennett. They looked serious and uncomfortable. General Richardson, the mayor said, thank you for seeing us. We wanted to speak with you before the graduation ceremony. Howard gestured for them to sit down. What can I do for you, gentlemen? Chief Bennett cleared his throat. First, sir, I want to personally apologize for Officer Miller's actions last night. His behavior does not represent our department's values or training. Howard looked at the police chief steadily. What does represent your department, Chief Bennett? Because Officer Miller seemed very confident in his actions. The chief shifted in his seat. Officer Miller has been with us for 15 years. He's had some complaints, but nothing this serious before. How many complaints? Paul asked. And what kind? The chief and the mayor exchanged glances. There have been 7 official complaints about Officer Miller in the past 3 years. Chief, Bennett admitted. Most of them involved accusations of unfair treatment during traffic stops. By people of color? Howard asked, though he already knew the answer. Chief Bennett nodded slowly. Yes, but none of the complaints led to formal discipline because there wasn't enough evidence. There's evidence now, Paul said, pointing to his phone where Susan's video was playing silently. Mayor Griffith leaned forward. General Richardson, we want to make this right. Officer Miller has been suspended without pay while we conduct a full investigation. We're also reviewing all his previous cases and complaints. Howard sipped his coffee, thinking carefully about his next words. Mayor Griffith, Chief Bennett, I appreciate you coming here today, but this isn't just about me or Officer Miller. This is about a system that allowed someone like him to wear a badge and carry a gun for 15 years, despite multiple complaints. The doorbell rang again. This time it was Ben Martinez, a reporter from the Riverdale News. Word had gotten out that the mayor and police chief were at the Richardson house. Other reporters were gathering on the sidewalk outside. Paul looked out the window and sighed. It's becoming a circus out there. Howard stood up. I need to make a statement, not just for the press, but for everyone in Riverdale and beyond who needs to hear it. Kevin looked at his uncle with admiration. What are you going to say? The truth, Howard replied simply. They all walked outside together. Cameras flashed and reporters called out questions as soon as they appeared on the front porch. Howard raised his hand, and everyone fell silent. In his uniform, with his commanding presence, he naturally took control of the situation. Good morning, Howard began. My name is General Howard Richardson. Last night I was pulled over while looking for my brother's house in this neighborhood. Officer Frank Miller pointed his gun at me without cause. He did not know I was a general. He only saw a black man in a nice car in a white neighborhood. The reporters scribbled notes and held up recorders. Howard continued, his voice clear and strong. I am speaking today not because of who I am, but because of who I am not. I am not just a 4-star general. I am a citizen who deserves the same respect and protection as any other citizen. What happened to me happens to Black Americans every day, but most don't have the platform I have to speak about it. Mayor Griffith stepped forward, eager to show he was taking action. The officer involved has been suspended, and we are conducting a thorough investigation. Riverdale does not tolerate racism or bias in our police force. Howard looked at the mayor. With respect, sir, it's not enough to punish one officer after the fact. The question is, how was he allowed to develop these attitudes and behaviors in the first place? How many warning signs were ignored? How many complaints were dismissed? Chief Bennett looked uncomfortable but nodded. These are fair questions, General, and ones we need to answer. From the crowd of reporters, a voice called out, General Richardson, will you be filing a lawsuit against the police department? Howard shook his head. No, I don't want money or personal revenge. What I want is change, real lasting change in how police work is done in this community, and others like it. Another reporter raised her hand. What kind of change are you talking about, General? Independent oversight, better training, community involvement in policing, and most importantly, a commitment to treat every person with dignity and respect, regardless of their skin color or what neighborhood they're driving through. As Howard spoke, more people gathered on the street. Neighbors came out of their houses. Cars slowed down to listen. Among the crowd was Officer Diane Carter, not in uniform, but in regular clothes. She listened carefully to every word. Kevin stepped forward to stand beside his uncle. I'm proud to be General Richardson's nephew. Today I graduate from college, but I've learned more from watching him handle this situation than I learned in 4 years of classes. Paul put his hand on his son's shoulder. We're all proud of you, Kevin, and we're all learning from this experience. Howard checked his watch. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a graduation to attend. My nephew has worked hard for this day and we don't want to miss it. The crowd parted to let them pass. As they walked to Paul's car, Howard noticed Officer Carter approaching them. General Richardson, she said quietly, I wanted to apologize again for last night, and I wanted you to know that some of us in the department are listening. We want things to change too. Howard nodded. Then help make that change happen, Officer Carter, from the inside. They drove to Riverdale University in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The campus was beautiful, with green lawns and old brick buildings. Students in graduation gowns took pictures with their families. It looked peaceful and normal, as if the events of last night had happened in another world. But as they walked toward the graduation ceremony, Howard noticed people looking at him. Some took pictures with their phones. Others whispered to each other. His story had spread quickly. A young campus security officer recognized him and stopped. "General Richardson, sir. It's an honor to meet you. I saw what happened. I just want to say I'm sorry and thank you for your service." Howard thanked him and moved on. The incident had changed him from a visitor to a symbol in less than 24 hours. But today wasn't about him. It was about Kevin and his achievement. Howard straightened his uniform and prepared to celebrate his nephew's big day, even as he knew that the conversation about what had happened was just beginning. The graduation ceremony was beautiful. Under a clear blue sky, hundreds of students in black caps and gowns received their diplomas. Proud families cheered from the audience. When Kevin Richardson's name was called, Howard and Paul stood up and clapped loudly. For a few hours, they were just a family celebrating a milestone. But reality returned as soon as they left the university grounds. Howard's phone wouldn't stop ringing. News stations wanted interviews. Military officials wanted statements. Even the governor had called to express concern about the incident. Back at Paul's house, Howard sat in the living room watching himself on television. The story had gone national. Every major news channel showed Susan Palmer's video and discussed what it meant. Some focused on Howard's military rank, expressing shock that even a 4-star general could face such treatment. Others used the incident to talk about wider issues of police bias and racism. "You're famous now," Kevin said, sitting down next to his uncle. He had changed out of his graduation gown but still wore the colorful cords that showed his academic achievements. "Not the kind of fame I ever wanted," Howard replied. The doorbell rang again. Paul answered it and returned with Susan Palmer, the city council member who had recorded the video. "General Richardson," Susan said, "I hope I'm not intruding. I wanted to talk to you about what happens next." Howard gestured for her to sit down. "What did you have in mind, Miss Palmer?" Susan placed a folder on the coffee table. "For the past year, I've been working on a proposal for a civilian oversight committee for our police department. Chief Bennett and Mayor Griffith have been resistant. But after what happened to you, people are demanding change." Howard opened the folder and looked through the documents inside. The proposal was detailed and thoughtful. It called for independent reviews of police complaints, community involvement in officer training, and regular public reports on police activities. "This is good work," Howard said. "Have you shown it to others on the city council?" "Yes, but it never got enough support to move forward," Susan explained. "Now I think that might change. Your case has opened a lot of eyes." Paul joined them, bringing coffee for everyone. "So you want my brother to help push this through?" Susan nodded. "If you're willing, General. Your voice would carry weight." Howard thought about it. He had planned to return to Washington tomorrow. His work at the Pentagon was important and demanding, but so was this. "I'll need to make some calls," he said finally. "But yes, I'm willing to help." While they talked, across town in a small apartment, Frank Miller sat alone watching the same news coverage. He had never expected to see himself on national television, especially not like this. The video showed him pointing his gun at a man who had done nothing wrong. The commentators called him racist, biased, dangerous. His phone had been ringing too, mostly reporters wanting statements, but also a few people leaving threatening messages. Frank turned off the TV and opened a beer. He didn't see himself the way others now did. In his mind, he was a good cop who had made a split-second decision to protect his community. Yes, he had been wrong about General Richardson, but it could have been someone else. Someone actually dangerous. That's what people didn't understand about police work. You had to make quick judgments to stay safe. The phone rang again. This time, it was Diane Carter. "Miller, it's me," she said when he answered. "The Internal Affairs investigators want to meet with you tomorrow morning." Frank took a long drink of his beer. "What's the point? They've already decided I'm guilty." "This is serious, Frank," Diane said. "The department is reviewing all your previous stops and arrests. They're looking for patterns." Frank felt a chill run through him. He knew what they would find. He had stopped more Black and Hispanic drivers than white ones. He had searched their cars more often. He had issued more tickets to them. But in his mind, that wasn't bias, it was good police work. "They can look all they want," he said. "I've got nothing to hide." Diane sighed. "Frank, I've known you for 15 years. We need to have an honest conversation about this. Your job is on the line." "My job?" Frank laughed bitterly. "My whole life is on the line. I can't even go to the grocery store without people pointing at me and whispering." "Then maybe you should think about why," Diane said before hanging up. The next morning, Howard met with Mayor Griffith, Chief Bennett, and the City Council in an emergency session. The meeting was open to the public and the room was packed. People stood along the walls and outside in the hallway. Television cameras recorded everything. Howard wore his uniform again. He spoke clearly and directly about what had happened to him and what needed to change in Riverdale. "This isn't just about one officer or one incident," he said. "This is about creating a system where all citizens feel protected rather than threatened by those who are sworn to serve them." Susan Palmer presented her proposal for civilian oversight. This time, the council members listened closely. When the vote came, it passed unanimously. The crowd applauded. After the meeting, Howard stepped outside into the bright sunlight. Reporters surrounded him immediately. One asked, "General Richardson, do you think Officer Miller should be fired?" Howard paused before answering. "This isn't about one person losing their job, it's about changing a culture. Officer Miller needs to be held accountable for his actions, but firing him and moving on would just be treating a symptom, not the disease." Across town, Frank sat in a small conference room facing 3 internal affairs investigators. They had videos and records of his traffic stops spread out on the table between them. The numbers were impossible to ignore. The patterns were clear. "Officer Miller," one investigator said, "how do you explain the fact that you pulled over Black drivers at a rate 4 times higher than white drivers in the same neighborhoods?" Frank shifted uncomfortably in his chair. For the first time, he was beginning to see himself through others' eyes. The evidence was laid out in front of him, impossible to deny. I don't know," he admitted. It was the first honest answer he had given since the incident. That afternoon, Paul drove Howard to the airport. Kevin came along to say goodbye to his uncle. They talked about the changes that were coming to Riverdale and what they might mean. "Will you come back for the Oversight Committee meetings?" Paul asked. Howard nodded. "As often as I can. This work is important." Kevin had been quiet for most of the drive, but now he spoke up. "Uncle Howard, I've been thinking a lot about my future since all this happened." "Oh?" Howard looked at his nephew with interest. "I was planning to go into business, but now I'm thinking about law school, civil rights law specifically." Kevin's voice grew stronger as he spoke. "What happened to you made me realize that there are battles still being fought right here, not just overseas." Howard felt a surge of pride. "That's a worthy path, Kevin, and one where you can make a real difference." They arrived at the airport and parked. Before getting out of the car, Howard looked at his brother and nephew. "This wasn't how I expected this visit to go, but maybe some good will come from it after all." Paul smiled. "You turned something ugly into something hopeful. That's what leaders do." They walked into the terminal together. People recognized Howard and stopped to watch him pass. Some nodded respectfully. Others took pictures. A few came up to shake his hand and thank him for speaking out. As Howard checked in for his flight, a young Black police officer approached him nervously. "General Richardson, I'm Officer Marcus Young from the Riverdale PD. I just wanted to say thank you. What you're doing matters to those of us trying to change things from the inside." Howard shook the young officer's hand. "Keep doing that." "Good work, Officer Young. Change happens from both directions, outside pressure and inside reform. As he walked toward security, Howard thought about Frank Miller. He wondered if the officer was capable of change, of seeing his own biases and working to overcome them. He hoped so. Because true justice wasn't about punishment, it was about transformation. Howard passed through security and headed toward his gate. His phone buzzed with a message from the Pentagon. The world of national security and military strategy was calling him back. But he knew he would return to Riverdale. The work here had only just begun. 6 months passed. The leaves in Riverdale changed from green to gold to gone. Winter settled over the small town with a blanket of snow. But the changes brought by Howard Richardson's visit ran deeper than the seasons. Howard returned to Riverdale on a cold December morning. He had flown in from Washington to attend the first official meeting of the Civilian Police Oversight Committee. The snow crunched under his boots as he walked from his rental car to the town hall. This time, no one pointed a gun at him. Instead, people nodded and smiled as he passed. Inside the building, the meeting room was already full. Susan Palmer waved to him from the front row. Mayor Griffith and Chief Bennett stood talking quietly in one corner. Paul and Kevin were there too, saving a seat for Howard. "Uncle Howard," Kevin said, standing to hug him. "How long can you stay this time?" 3 days, Howard replied. "The Pentagon keeps me busy, but this is important too." The Oversight Committee consisted of 9 people from different parts of the community. Susan was the chairperson. There were teachers, business owners, religious leaders, and regular citizens. They represented the diversity of Riverdale in age, race, and background. Chief Bennett called the meeting to order. He looked different now, humbler, more open to listening. The past 6 months had changed him too. "Before we begin," the chief said, "I want to thank General Richardson for returning to Riverdale for this historic occasion. What happened to him was unacceptable, but his response has helped our department become better." Howard nodded in acknowledgement. He didn't want personal praise. He wanted progress. Susan presented the committee's first report. They had reviewed all complaints against the police department for the past 5 years. They had examined training procedures and hiring practices. They had interviewed officers and community members. The report was honest about problems, but also noted positive changes already taking place. "Officers are now required to complete bias training every 6 months, Susan explained. "All patrol cars have been equipped with better cameras. The department has hired more officers of color and women. And perhaps most importantly, there's a new emphasis on community policing, getting officers out of their cars and into neighborhoods to build relationships." Mayor Griffith spoke next. "Crime rates have not increased as some feared. In fact, in some areas they've decreased. It turns out that when people trust the police, they're more willing to work with them." Howard listened carefully to every speaker. He was impressed by the real changes he was seeing. But one question remained in his mind. After the meeting ended, he approached Chief Bennett. "What happened to Officer Miller?" he asked. The chief's expression grew serious. "He was terminated from the force after our investigation. The evidence of bias in his policing was too strong to ignore." Howard nodded. He had expected this outcome. "And how is he doing now?" The chief looked surprised by the question. "I'm not sure. I haven't spoken to him since the hearing." "Why do you ask?" "Because true change means everyone has a chance to learn and grow," Howard said, "even those who have made serious mistakes." The next day, Howard did something unexpected. He asked Paul to drive him to Frank Miller's address. The former officer now worked at a warehouse on the edge of town. He lived in a small apartment nearby. "Are you sure about this?" Paul asked as they parked outside the plain brick building. Howard nodded. "Yes, I need to do this." Frank Miller was surprised when he opened his door and saw General Richardson standing there. He had lost weight. His face looked tired and older. "Can I come in?" Howard asked. Frank hesitated, then stepped back to let him enter. The apartment was small and sparsely furnished. There were no pictures on the walls, no personal touches. It looked like a place someone stayed, not a place someone lived. "Why are you here?" Frank asked when they were seated. "I wanted to see." "How you're doing," Howard said simply. Frank laughed bitterly. "How I'm doing? I lost my job. I lost my friends. Some people in this town still cross the street when they see me coming." "That sounds difficult," Howard said. Frank looked at him with confusion. "Why do you care? I pointed a gun at you. I treated you like a criminal because of the color of your skin." "Yes, you did," Howard agreed. "And that was wrong. But I didn't come here to remind you of that. I came to ask what you've learned." The question hung in the air between them. Frank was silent for a long time before he spoke. "I've learned that I was wrong," he said finally. "Not just about you that night, but about a lot of things. I always thought I was just being a good cop, being careful. But when they showed me the numbers, the patterns in my stops and searches," he shook his head. "I couldn't deny it anymore." Howard nodded. "Recognition is the first step. What comes next?" Frank looked down at his hands. "I don't know. No police department will hire me now. Most people in town hate me. Sometimes I think about moving away, starting over somewhere else." "Running away won't solve anything," Howard said. "The real work happens here, facing what you've done and helping others not make the same mistakes." Frank looked up. "How would I do that?" "The Oversight Committee is planning a series of community conversations about policing and race," Howard explained. "They need people from all perspectives to participate." "You think they would want to hear from me?" Frank asked in disbelief. "Your story is important," Howard said. "Both the mistakes you made and the lessons you've learned. It won't be easy. People will be angry, but it might help." When Howard left Frank's apartment, he felt a sense of completion. He had come full circle from that night 6 months ago. He wasn't naive enough to think that one conversation could undo years of bias, but it was a start. That evening, Howard had dinner with Paul, Kevin, and Susan at Paul's house. Kevin had been accepted to law school for the following fall. He was excited to begin his new path. "The Oversight Committee is doing good work," Howard told Susan. "You should be proud." "We still have a long way to go," she replied. "But yes, we're making progress." Paul raised his glass in a toast. To unexpected changes and new beginnings, they all raised their glasses. Through the window, Howard could see snow falling softly on Maple Street, the same street where he had been pulled over that summer night. The place looked peaceful now, but he knew that real peace came not from silence but from justice. The next day, Howard attended a community forum at Riverdale High School. The gymnasium was packed with people of all ages and backgrounds. Chief Bennett was there with several of his officers, including Diane Carter, who had recently been promoted to captain. Frank Miller sat quietly in the back row. He had accepted Howard's invitation to come listen. Howard was asked to speak. As he walked to the microphone, he saw many familiar faces in the crowd. The mayor, Susan, and the Oversight Committee. His brother and nephew. Officer Young, the young black police officer he had met at the airport. And many others he didn't know. Citizens of Riverdale who had come together to talk about making their community better. 6 months ago I came to Riverdale for a graduation, Howard began. I didn't expect to become part of this community's story. But sometimes life takes unexpected turns. What matters is what we do with those moments. He looked out at the diverse faces watching him. What happened to me that night was wrong. But what has happened since then has been remarkable. You have taken an ugly incident and turned it into an opportunity for growth and change. That's not easy. It requires courage and honesty and persistence. Howard spoke about his conversation with Frank Miller, though he didn't mention him by name. He talked about the importance of accountability, but also of redemption and second chances. True justice isn't about punishment, he said. It's about transformation. Of individuals, of systems, of communities. As Howard finished speaking, the gymnasium erupted in applause. People stood and cheered. In the back row, Frank Miller remained seated, but he was listening. And in that moment, Howard knew that the work would continue long after he returned to Washington. The changes in Riverdale were just the beginning. One town, one police department, one community at a time, that was how progress happened. Not all at once, but step by step, person by person, day by day. As Howard looked out at the faces before him, hopeful, determined, committed to change, he felt something he hadn't expected to feel when a gun was pointed at him 6 months earlier. Hope.